But the idea of celebration, as somebody was saying, is not about getting discount coupons, being able to, go to a restaurant and have a defray on your bill. Women's Day is not about that. Women's Day celebrations are about identifying what are also still our key stumbling blocks. How do we overcome these stumbling blocks? And how do we actually see that systems and institutions change to enable women to be at every location that they would like to be? The whole issue of sexual harassment and safe workplaces for women has been a very long concern in the women's movements in this country. Of course, at the time of independence, there were several women in the workplaces, but these women definitely were not in the workplaces of the kind that we are in. They were largely women in the agriculture sector. They were women in the early industrial factories. They were also there in mines. They were in very hazardous workplaces and also in very tedious, difficult, monotonous, back-breaking kind of jobs. Even to this day, large majority of working women in India actually are in those locations. Now, this particular act is also supposed to be applicable to them, but it's much harder there compared to in workplaces where we are all located in. So, the initial years of India's independence and post-India's independence and the period of 1970s when the women's movements have come into being all over again, from mid-1975 onwards, there was a lot of discussion about discrimination at the workplace. Women and men were being paid very different salaries in lots of organizations and also were being paid though they were doing absolutely the same kind of job. For example, women air hostesses and men pursers were paid a very different salary. And the women air hostesses of Air India actually mobilized themselves and they went to court and they went up to the Supreme Court. And then the court said, we have to pass the Equal Remuneration Act and there has to be equal remuneration. So equal pay for equal work was what came about. Otherwise, there were cases where women who were secretaries and stenographers, they were paid lower than men who were doing the same job. So the assumption is that women probably do not have the capability, and another assumption also is that women's salaries and women's wages are secondary incomes to the family. So men are seen as primary workers, men are seen as workers, and therefore their incomes are seen as primary, and women's incomes are seen as something that provide an add-on to the existing family income. In our country, we also had several debates whether there has to be only one job per family. Okay, the assumption is that if women come into the workforce and women compete for jobs, then there would be many more men who will not get jobs, and that would actually create unemployment for men. Again, the assumption is that employment primarily is that for men, and women are somebody who are coming in and competing with men, which they should not be. They should be staying back at home. So much of these perspectives and assumptions also come from a lot of perspectives that are part of our ongoing thinking, where we think that what we do is because of our natural biological predisposition, that women are there for giving birth to children and men are there to go and source food, source money, and source possibilities for a family to survive. Now, this kind of perspective itself comes from a broad industrial era where we look at what's going on now and then impute it back to years and then try to give it a kind of a biological theory, and we call it biological determinism. The assumption is that our bodies are what limit what we do, and therefore women are limited to certain kinds of occupations because that is what their bodies can do. And in fact, at one point there was also theory that assumed that all of us come with very limited energies, and our energies are geared for doing certain things. So men's energies are geared towards doing work, and women's energies are geared towards giving birth to babies. So if women are put to any kind of education, it was seen as something that would unnecessarily exert their brain, and probably then their abilities to give birth to babies will compromise. So therefore there were, in the early period of the 19th century, education policies that said that give women education but at a very minimal level, so that their minds are not unnecessarily exerted and exercised, and also are they lose their energies doing that. Therefore maths and science was not seen as something that was appropriate for women at all, because it was seen that would exert the women's brains too much, and they would then have difficulties with bearing children.